Hi there, my name is Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. Coming up on this episode of the podcast, we're going to be discussing Visual Hygiene 101. These are the core principles that any myopia management specialist needs to be able to communicate to their patients and parents. We're talking about close work and screen time and the importance of getting outdoors. This is going to be a two-part episode. The first part is the regular version of this episode, which is all about the presentation. And this is the most important part of visual hygiene, in my opinion, because I have seen so many ECPs struggle with communicating these core concepts of visual hygiene. For our paid supporters who went to our Substack at myopiamindset.substack.com, they'll be getting part two, which is the extended version of this episode, which is a deeper dive into all of the things I just mentioned and more. All right, let's get to the episode. All right, welcome to the Myopia Mindset. This is a podcast where it's not just myopia that matters, but also the mindset of the practitioners, the academics, the industry professionals who practice in this space. And I have with me our regular guest co-host, Carrie Herzberg, for this episode. Carrie, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. And Carrie is, of course, a series regular because this podcast, the inspiration for it comes from the kind of conversations that Carrie and I have every week. Carrie is my father, and I grew up in his practice. He's a pioneer orthokeratologist. He is the founder of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. And he was a former president of the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. He's one of the gurus in this space, and there's many ECPs who do myopia management who cite him as a direct inspiration. And Carrie, I wanted to take advantage of one of your particular, very specific knowledge sets, which is, we did an episode before about 5 years ago where you mentioned this idea of visual hygiene. And you've also spoken on this topic with Marino Formenti. And you've also talked about it in other venues. But, when I had the old show, this is the number one thing I got asked about was when Carrie mentioned visual hygiene. What is that? And can he go more into it? So I thought, why don't we do a visual hygiene 101 kind of episode, because when it comes to myopia management and when it comes to the myopia mindset, it isn't just about the obvious factors, right? It's about the whole story, the whole enchilada of the patient, their parents, their school, what they're doing at home. Are they getting outside and getting enough exercise? What are their eating habits? It's the whole thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And you in particular, you started noticing these trends, very, very early on,
In the 80s.
going back to that, in the 80s, so why don't you go into that? Why don't we start out with that?
Yeah. I graduated in 71 and my dad had a practice in the city of Chicago where I kind of cut my teeth on. And so at that point in our practice of development, we didn't, after a patient got through college, we didn't see them again until they got to be 40 years of age because their eyes didn't change. They were basically, if they didn't get that myopia thing in school, afterwards it was pretty stable. So along about in the early 80s, started noticing patients were coming in and they were coming every 6 months for vision checkups. So this is very unusual. Well, in the past, we had striven to get these patients in there between their 20s and 40s because obviously you want to check their vision health and make sure their retinas are in good shape and everything's good. And so they wouldn't come in unless they had a visual complaint usually. So the whole concept of preventive care was just getting it started there with the idea that, patients should come in regularly to see their physicians, to monitor their health, and they shouldn't just wait till all the wheels came off the truck, and then,
Right.
they were, there's not much that could be done. So that was just beginning then. And so one of the things that happened at that point that a lot of our patients were going through is they started the IBM workstation came out, the desktop. And a lot of these patients were working on computers now that they had never done that before. They'd never worked on computers at work, and or personal computer, an Apple product did saturate the market at that point, but now they were. And so we were seeing the effects of it. And interesting enough, at the same time, Matt, that this was going on, was that we saw the increases in diabetes and obesity at the same time. The sedentary population, sitting too much, not moving around, not as active. And so this really didn't really catch anybody's clear attention until the 90s, because people were intimidated to report these things that they were seeing. They may not have been a real thing. They were afraid to commit to it because maybe this was just a phenomenon that just didn't, ended and wasn't a long-term problem. But as we know now, that this has become a very long-term problem, which we're now dealing with today in the forms of obesity and diabetes, and along with that, myopia. So these kind of three things kind of go together. And it's this sedentary lifestyle thing, now that it's been compared now to the modern day, thinking of smoking itself as being as unhealthy. So this is what struck me at the time, because I was at that point, we talked about this earlier, being a preventive care optometrist. Basically, I kind of didn't feel like I should be sitting there and not doing something about a problem, and in fact, making the problem worse, as we were with myopia. So that's where the whole development of myopia control, myopia management came from. But it had its core beginnings in what we call these things, the symptoms that patients were doing, we're referring to now as visual hygiene. Along with that, I also worked for a while for Prio Corporation, which was involved with computer vision syndrome. And this was really a big help on the whole topic, because I actually wrote courses for, were CE courses for computer vision. And I did one on kids and myopia, kids and computers. And this is back in the early 2000s, and ECPs would come to me, my colleagues would come to me and say, what are you talking about, kids and computers? They didn't even know that the kids were doing this, at that point.
Yeah. It seems so quaint now, doesn't it?
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that like? Because like I remember when you got into computer vision specifically, and what was that like? To have that kind of information just staring you right in the face, like you were seeing it in your patients. It's like you were like watching this trend develop, because right now our kids don't go outside at all. Basically, a sedentary lifestyle is the norm now. We have to come up with special ways to motivate people to just go outside and take a friggin' walk.
I know.
To exercise, and our eating habits are awful. So it's like, what was it like to kind of see this trend developing as it was happening?
It was scary. And the thing that struck me the most was that the powers that be were suppressing the information.
How so?
We were doing studies, and we used a gal, I won't name names, at the University of California, Berkeley, that do a study for us, plainly demonstrating what computer vision syndrome and its influences had on deteriorating vision. And it was a conclusive study, but she was told in no uncertain terms that she published this thing, she had no future.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
They suppressed it. These were, it's interesting times, but they were, this is the promotion of a solid monolith of education that said that it's all genetics. There's no environment. See, once you introduce environment into this thing and say the environment has a role, then oh my God, then we're all culpable. Right. we're all take part in that, right? But if you say it's all genetics, then it doesn't make any difference. No matter what you're going to do, they're going to get nearsighted. And this was the fait accompli for our patients. Was their vision in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So we fought against the whole thing, the whole structure of our profession. And this, I guess I was really suited for this, because being an orthokeratologist, man, I was used to that, like the horns and tail, kind of a thing. Like, what were you doing to people's eyeballs? So to me, it wasn't unusual to come up against this same problem again. We were sitting there as clinicians looking at this phenomenon. Like you asked me before, we were watching our patients progressively get worse every 6 months. That usually didn't come into our office for 5 to 10 years at a time, because their vision was so stable. And we also saw the fact that their parents didn't have any trends like this. If they did, then they did it in graduate school, like we talked about, and their
Yeah.
parents before them were hyperopic.
Virtually unheard of. Yeah.
Yeah. So here we were seeing a very much of an environmentally driven phenomenon that was being denied by you know, our profession, educators, all were denying the fact that this was, even happening, or if it was due to environment at all. They were all on that track of this is just a genetic thing. Your parents were nearsighted, you'll be nearsighted.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't even look into the fact that maybe this was a one generational parental thing, because the parents, through their habits, and were inducing myopia.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting time to be alive. It was an interesting time to face all this. We had this dichotomy going on in our profession where the clinicians were actually at odds with with our educators, because they were not buying it. It was a one track pony there, one thought process.
Right.
So we did these studies and they got suppressed. They never got published.
Wow.
And they were great studies too. I contributed a bunch of them. So, I was being one of the lead persons for PRIO. So,
well, this is kind of a whole thing about, because you used to tell me, like, in the early days of the AAOMC, back when it was the Orthokeratology Academy of America, you would often say, like, optometry specifically dropped the ball.
Oh my God.
With this particular issue. But
let's count the ways.
I mean, and look, you're like, I'm not an optometrist. You are. That's fair. It's a fair argument for you to make. You were there. I wasn't. But we're
still
say
dealing
that,
today.
Yeah.
With the same problem.
How so?
That's why I think that it's so hard. People in their minds want to say everybody should be doing myopia.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're dealing with a profession. About half of us have really strict doubts about whether this is even, a thing to do, whether it's worth it. I mean, you look at the surveys that they do, about half of the optometrists out there now question whether it's worth the investment for the patient to make. It's worth their investment to save. They talk about saving a quarter of myopia. That's what they're talking about number wise. And so that still goes on today. Maybe we're doing a little bit better as far as our odds are concerned. I mean, back in the day, God, we had 100 people, I think, that were, among a profession with 30,000 doctors, had 100 people. I mean, seriously. So, we've got better odds now, but I still we still see the same things filtering through our profession. The fact that for whatever reason, whether it's preventive care or other things, it's a hard sell. And I think part of it is the fact that we're not structured, and it's not just us, it's medicine in general, to do preventive care. Dentistry's done this the best. I really admire them, because they've had they've done this despite all this. They've sold that preventive care model, and we all should take notes, and try to copy that, because it's a very successful model. But look at everything else. It's just, we're still not there. We're, even today we're it's where it's, you're even criticized for making a statement to an obese patient that they're obese.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's where I was going before, because you brought up smoking earlier. Yeah. I was a cigarette smoker for 15 years. Okay. And was it my general practitioner, or was it my dentist who gave me guff about smoking? It was my dentist.
Yeah.
My general practitioner, my doctor, the person I saw once a year or whatever, right? They would be like, smoking's bad for you, right? And I'd be like, yeah. And he'd be like, okay. And that would be it. It was my dentist who was like, are you aware of how bad smoking is affecting your teeth? And I was like, yeah, it stains it, whatever. He's like, okay, in addition to the fact that when you come in here, I'm glad that I'm wearing a mask, because you reek. He would just tell me this, right? He's like, you smell terrible. Okay. On top of that, I want to show you how badly this has been affecting your teeth.
Yeah.
And here's what you can expect moving forward if this continues, right? He really got on me about it.
Yeah, which he should.
Yeah.
And physicians should. I had patients walk out the door on me. They would just walk out of the chair. I'd be in the midst. I'd just be beginning the exam part of it, and talking, and they would just get up and leave. because
Yeah.
they don't, they were not interested in hearing this stuff. And that, that, I think we as doctors are so much want to please our patients, and be
Mm-hmm.
the guy or the gal, and we can't play that role. I used to say that, if you're a leader of a group, you can't be everybody's friend.
Right.
That's not the definition of leadership. So I think we have that same issue today. We want so badly to please people that we don't want to we don't want to face that reality that we're going to have a patient that just doesn't react really well to the conversation. I
Yeah.
had people come to me later on after they left, and they came back again because they said, you know what? I didn't even realize this causes diabetes, obesity. My physician never told me that. I
Right.
said, you got to be putting me on, and so, you again, I think I was just maybe genetically appropriate for this role because I was used to being, the one that gets the criticism all the time, and why not, let's do this again, let's complete the curve here, and let's do all these different things that need to get done, and you can't be afraid of being in that role. So I think,
Well, yeah, it's not just being afraid of that role, because we'll go into that in just a little bit, but I think it's also like, what are you there to do?
oh,
You know
that's
what I
it.
mean? Are you
Yeah,
are you an optometrist who's just going to be like, "Hey, your prescription got worse. I guess I'll see you next year. Please don't get your glasses on Warby Parker.
yeah.
Cross my
Well,
fingers." Right? Like, do you want to be that kind of eye care provider, or
we
do
have
you want to be somebody who sees a health problem and wants to, take care of the patient?
we see these conversations all the time, and we can dry up this vision care plan thing, and we can talk you know
Hmm.
on and on about that thing. But doctors will spend more time arguing how they can make a couple more cents on the sale of a disposable contact lens than they will put the time into actually sitting down and actually doing preventive care with their patients, regardless of what's happening outside there. Because the model will be for them, if they do this
Hmm.
correctly, will be much more successful.
Yeah.
Instead of making pennies, they'll be making an income they could never dream of. And it's not based on the fact that they are good salespeople. You have to be a good salesperson too, but it's also based on the fact they're doing a good thing for their patients. You know, they're
Yeah.
they're helping their patients.
Yeah, but I think what most people don't understand, and by no means am I an expert on this subject, but I had a great education over the last couple of years on what it takes to be good at sales. And part of what it takes to be good at selling something is to show up, and to show up in a way that shows your customer that they matter and that your product matters. And if you're willing to go through an uncomfortable conversation for both of you, because because you're talking about somebody's health,
Hmm.
right? And if you're willing to risk making them a little bit uncomfortable or even upset, in the case where you had patients walk out, the message that you are sending that person is that this matters. And
That's
this
right.
matters so much that I am willing to take the risk to make you
Yeah.
uncomfortable because it's that important to me. And
And
that
the
develops a sense of genuine authenticity and trust that I
walk
think
the
is
yeah.
lacking in most in scenarios. Would you agree?
Yes. And I also say walk the talk,
Mhm.
because there's nothing that I did with my patients that I didn't do myself.
Right.
If I said, you need to exercise, you need to do weights, you need to do this, you need to do that, I did those things.
Right.
Okay. I wasn't going to show up like my father's physician was over 300 pounds and a smoker. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
was going to be the model of what I was, what my talk was about.
Right.
I
Right.
was walking the talk. And so, that's a hard thing for us as physicians to do, because that means we're held to another level of accountability,
Yes.
with our patients.
Right.
It's one thing to sit there and, talk about it, but it's another thing to actually do it yourself. So, you know,
Yeah.
and that whole thing comes down to the patient. You're right. They can feel it. I mean, patients were never in doubt about my passion. I could be dead
Mhm.
wrong. Okay. I could stand and lecture in front of an entire group of physicians, talk about a thing, and I could be dead wrong about it, but I could carry the day if I was passionate enough,
Mhm.
you know, if I could carry the day on that. And so, and I would look forward to the times when I would meet someone else in the audience who's as passionate as I was, whether we agree or not. I thought that
Right.
was the greatest thing. This is like, wow, let's get going on this thing now.
Yep.
So, yes, all these things come into it. I mean, how hard is that for someone to do that? Someone who's been, who's lived their life and hasn't really addressed that themselves, really, because that's what my colleagues deal with, is they're just, that they're going to burn out because they can't face the fact that what they're doing is not healthy for them and it's not good for their patients. And so
Mm-hmm.
eventually what it ends up with, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you become mentally ill for it, or you physically ill, or you just decide I got to get out of this thing because it's, this is not,
Demoralized,
yeah,
demotivated,
yes,
you know,
everything, all those things.
what desensitized to what's actually
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
And then you just start looking for a way out, which,
all yeah,
I mean, a lot of the people that end up becoming successful in ortho-K and myopia management were in a scenario where they realized they
yeah,
were becoming desensitized.
oh yeah,
Past president Paul Levine was like, he was beginning to get bored and desensitized with modern eye care until he learned about ortho-K. And then he was just like, oh, what is this? This is exciting. I can actually make a difference.
this is why you went to school
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
learn
What did
this
you go
thing,
to school for? Right.
right?
Yeah.
If you went to school to make money, then you're in the wrong field. I mean, honestly, you
Mm-hmm.
can play the stock market or something,
There's
right?
better ways to make money, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is not that path. I mean, I'm not saying that you won't make money. You will, because you'll be generally giving a message that's not, like you said, isn't often heard in modern medicine today. Yeah, you're not. They've given up. A lot of our physician colleagues have given up saying this thing because they realize it's falling on deaf ears or whatever they've sold themselves. So
Right.
they've lost that fight already. I wouldn't want to. I tell you what, if I had to do that and listen to that all day, that would get old in a hurry. To
Mm-hmm.
listen to the disease. Disease is a two part. Is a word that you can split into. Dis-ease. Lack of
Yeah.
ease.
Yeah.
So it's like this all starts that fact that you are you're not in touch with what's
Mm-hmm.
really going on with yourself and your
Yeah.
patients.
And I don't know how it is for people in the rest of the world, but my experience with Americans specifically is that we are very negatively focused. We're very negative about so many different things. And when you surround yourself with that, then you begin to go down that path of like, well, nothing matters. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't like, how much investment should I have in this? Like, is it worth it? All of these things are great questions, but
And the reinforcer to that too is the patient gives you the feedback. If you're that,
right.
if you're on that balance thing right, that your career going one way or another, I mean, my prayers are with you because you're
Mhm.
not going to make it. In order to make it today, you're going to have a resolve and a set idea, like we talked about earlier, about where you're going with this thing
Mhm.
and your path forward. If you don't have that, I used to compare it like a boat without a rudder in a lake. You can't, you're not, the winds are just going to blow you one way, blow you another way. It's a heck of a way to try to live. So you've got to go in there first off with that mindset that this is my path. This is what I'm going to be doing no
Right.
matter what. And that's a successful path because that you do get success with that. But if you're not there and you're looking for feedback all the time, it
Yeah, and the reason why we are stressing this so much for the first part of this episode, because I want to go into what the core pillars are of visual hygiene after this, but I also want to point out the reason why we are trying to drive this home is because if you cannot show up and have the commitment and the passion and the conviction to ask these kind of questions or get this kind of seek out this kind of information for your patients, to tell your parents of your young patients that things need to change. If you don't come in with that, this is not going to work. Like,
no.
I can't tell you how many practices I've visited over the years where they would ask the questions. I can think of 3 off the top of my head practices where I was like shadowing the doctors and the techs, and I watched the techs ask the patients how much computer use or screen time, and then they would ask them pointed questions about like, how compared to last year has this amount gone up, and it went up. And I asked the techs, like, that's great. I was like, that's great that you're asking these questions. What are you guys doing with this information? And they're like, oh, we just collect it. And then I would ask the doctor, did you know your techs are asking them how much screen time? And they're like, yeah. And like, and did you know that the screen time has been going up exponentially after every year. Yeah. What are you doing with that information? And they're like, nothing. And it's like, so you're not even going to tell, your patients and their parents that this is a problem.
Like, it's so insane, because it's like exactly like you said. And it's like, okay, let's talk about computer vision syndrome, because it's an easy example.
Sure.
People sit in front of computers all day. 75% of them get computer vision syndrome. It's an unnatural act. You get the focusing issues, the other things that happen with it. It needs a pair of glasses just for computers. This prescription that we call near variable focus lenses are the most amazing reading lenses you've ever worked with, in my experience. And it solves many of the problems that you face in a vision care plan, because it's a second pair.
Mm-hmm.
But they would never, if you did a minimum amount of education with your patients, did some of the testing, and then said, you know what, we need to do this, you'd be stimulating your sales like through the roof, because you're getting a prescription, you're getting a pair of glasses now that most doctors don't even offer these things. At least back in the day they didn't. It's better now. And your patients would be buying that from you and putting money in your pocket, and they couldn't even do this. Yeah. And that's where the reward of education comes in, because you do the ed and you do it, you get the patient that responds, of course, I want to do this, and they're you go for symptoms, they'll tell you all the symptoms you're looking for this problem,
Right.
So here it was, plainly, that's all you need to do. And yet to make that step, because it involves talking to the patient, on educating the patient on these things, it didn't get done. I I had some sessions where I was, talking to doctors, teaching them how to do the Prio device, how to use it. And they wanted to wait around that so they didn't have to do the testing. I said, what do you mean? I said, I don't want to do that near point RET there is involved to find out what the prescription is. I want to plug a number, and I'm too lazy to go in and do a RET that's going to generate for me this extra prescription, which is going to make it so that I don't have to see 15,000 patients a day, maybe only 50, and make more money at that. So they wanted ways to get around this. They didn't want to do the testing,
Mm-hmm.
because it was like it would take them an extra step, a couple minutes to do this extra step. So yes, that's what I'm saying, that this thing we're talking about is not for everybody. It's obviously not for everybody. I mean, we're sitting here talking about this. You're not going to see an absorption of myopia management throughout our population of doctors. It's not happening, because there's a lot of your colleagues that will never get to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, they might do a little bit of this one way or another, but they're never going to get into the fact of what we're talking about with our colleagues now are listening to this, or willing to make that kind of commitment. And that should be good news.
Yeah.
For these doctors are willing to do this, because it means that you're going to be able to define yourself and create and carve out a path that is available here, and a successful path that will carve out a difference between you and everybody else who's those dinosaurs who are tumbling on that path to getting replaced. Practicing optometry like it was 20, 30 years ago is not the way to survive in this climate today. I'm telling you, it ain't happening. So yes.
So you got to show up. You got to you got to represent what you are telling your parents and about their kids, your patients, and you have to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations. You have to be able to tell parents that their kids need to get outside more and need to eat better and need more exercise and less screen time.
Yes, this is an easier conversation than geriatric optometry.
Okay, how so?
Because I chose early in my life that I wanted to deal with kids. Mm-hmm. Because kids, you can reshape them. You can do something about it, and they'll listen to you. Most of the kids aren't as prejudiced as they get older. They get more prejudiced of things. They're wide open. They're open minds here to hear things, and all you really have to do is convince the parents. And a lot of the parents already realize what the problem was.
They know what the problem is. Yeah.
In geriatric optometry, you've got a chronic condition here, and most people in denial. I mean, seriously, most people are in denial over these kinds of problems: obesity, diabetes, whatever it is. You've got a much harder selling job. Yes, it's profitable because it's a sickness. It's an illness that you're taking care of, and there's medication you got to prescribe, and there's other things you got to do. And the patient does not get better; they usually get worse out of these things. Okay, it's not I wanted. My cup was half full, at least, or overflowing. I wanted something to keep that cup going. That's what you got to think about as eye care practitioner, you want to keep the cup overflowing. My cup runneth over. And the way to
Mm-hmm.
do that was to get to work with kids in this case and to see that growth that they have. I mean, there's reasons today, like, when I go to this practice now that we merged with it, I get mostly hugs all day. My patients are hugging me. They're so glad to see me and they tell me the story. And everybody knows the same story now. You saved my vision.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I can add to that is I said, your parent actually saved your vision because they were the one who trusted this process and did this thing. How's that for a story? Would you take that one, or the patient is in denial of their smoking and obesity is going to walk out the door on you? I mean, seriously, which one? Which you pick that picture? Okay, which
Mm-hmm.
one do you? I mean, this is a no-brainer for me. Okay,
Right.
so I purposely, I could see the involvement in geriatric optometry and geriatric eye care, and see how that was going to be it's so stressful in the way that if I was going to put my energy in, I wanted somebody to listen, at
Yeah.
least give me a
Yeah.
give me a chance. And a lot of times you don't get that chance.
Yeah. And the other thing I would like to add, because you also mentioned there, they have the kids thank the parents.
Yes.
And I've heard, so there's been two scenarios that I've encountered when it comes to docs talking with their patients about myopia management specifically, but also these things are that we're going to go into more detail in, about better eating habits, exercise, time outdoors, better practices in front of the screen and close work and whatnot. And, when you have these doctors who are afraid to tell the parents about this, I'm always astounded by it. One, because I grew up in your practice, it's second nature for this to be done. This is how we did things. This was part of our office protocol. I knew you, when I'm working in your practice, I knew you were talking about this with the patients, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
second nature to me. The other part is, like, imagine how many mom groups are out there. Imagine how many parent focused specific groups there are out there about health and wellness when it comes, and safety when it comes to children. So there's so many like little Facebook groups or Discord chats or whatever, Reddit, subreddits about health and wellness from a parent's perspective towards their children. Like, they are looking to keep their kids healthy and safe, and will go to great lengths to do that if necessary. And it boggles my head why optometrists won't acknowledge that that's a thing that parents are actually interested in. Maybe not all of your parents are. Maybe some of your parents don't want to hear this messaging and they're going to walk out like they did
Right.
with Carrie. But like, they're think about these mom groups. Think about these concerned parents who are looking for the healthiest food or exercise or social well-being and lifestyle and all of these different things, which are like hot topic issues on social media and in life. And why aren't you then saying, okay, well, that gives me, like, credence to go in there and talk about this then? Because there is a
Absolutely.
portion of the population, a significant portion of the population, specifically moms, who are seeking out better, nutrition, exercise, like, it comes right down to, like, I wouldn't put my baby in this kind of stroller because of this
Right.
chemical that was used in the fabric, and that's not good for them. Like, they will get
Yeah.
get into the weeds on that. So, like,
And
the audience is out there
oh
for
yeah, and
you to spread this message, and it's a good message to spread,
it's a
right?
very healthy message for both you and the
Yeah,
patient. It's a win-win. And the thing is that, doctors often cite the fact that they have these patients that don't listen. Those are not the majority of most of the people you
right,
talk to.
right,
You might have some bad luck in the early stages of implementing this, that you run into a couple, and 2 or 3 out of 10. But the thing is that once you get this thing rolling, they're attracted to you. It's like must be a law of physics to this, because they
right.
kind of just show up.
Yeah.
Once you open that door, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I will push back a little bit on what you said about bad luck, because I don't think so much as bad luck is, it's just you are trying to perfect the way that you are
Oh yeah,
presenting this
yeah,
message. I would say it's less bad luck and more of like like uh an actor, a performer,
absolutely.
an entertainer will practice their craft. They don't just look at the script and memorize it and then show up to shoot the TV show. A good actor will spend time like getting into character and figuring out who that character is and memorizing that script and practice delivering their lines. And I'm not saying you have to put on a performance. What I'm saying is
Well,
that if your message is better health and wellness for your patients, then you need to fine tune how you're going to present that. So I would push back that in the beginning, it's less bad luck and more of like you are just trying to figure out how to present this to your parents and
right.
what's working and what's not working. And how are you coming off genuine? Are you blasting them with too much information? Are you presenting it at the wrong stage of the exam? Like these are things you need to work out in your system on how to do this, right?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And to give you an example, is we'd have this patient come in, and for whatever reason, it didn't start off on the right foot, and I would tell the staff, I'd go out there and say, I'm going to turn this thing around. This person is now very much
Yeah.
anti us. When this
Yeah.
person leaves this office after I'm done, it's a totally different experience. And it's, yes, you are an actor in a way.
Mhm.
But you're controlling. It's more of a way that you can control your environment, how you want to address the message, how the message is going to be given. That's a form of acting. There's nothing wrong with that. You
Right.
learn how to do this properly. I learned those skills over time. uh, you know, and we all run it, sure, we all run into patients that, where it doesn't work. I mean, even to this
Sure.
day, I have some, they're not very often, but I sometimes have an experience. So it happens, but you get to use that as a learning experience, like you're saying. And I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, that's how life really works.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and here's the other thing I want to add too, based on one of the other points that you made, is that um, it doesn't really matter how many times you strike out with this, because you're not looking to get a perfect result out of every parent. What you're looking to do is pass along this information because this is important. This is about the health and well-being of your patients, right?
mhm.
And then you're not looking to get a perfect result. What you're looking for is that parent who understands what you're doing and is receptive to that. Because guess what? If that mom, and it's 99.9% of the time, it's the mom, right? If
Mhm.
it's that mom and she believes in your genuine authenticity and trust is forming and it's important to you, it's important to her, guess what? That mom knows dozens of other moms
Oh
that it
yeah.
is also important to. And that's what you're going for. You're not necessarily looking to like hit a home run every single time. You're looking to hit a home run with
Yeah.
that mom who it resonates with, because she is going to tell other moms that it will also resonate with about you as an eye care provider.
Yeah, it's you're at play. It's childlike almost in the way you go about this thing, because it's like, and I mean that in a very positive sense, in the fact that you're exploring all these things to do these things. And I mean, I've done the gamut of things. I had the unfortunateness of having a malpractice early on in my career. It was a brain tumor that
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't diagnosed. It was difficult for me to deal with it at the time. And the only good thing about the whole thing was the fact that the patient, it wasn't, unfortunate for the patient, was not operable. So the fact that I did catch it and he got past me and got picked up a little bit later didn't mean a life thing. I don't know how I would dealt with it if it had been his life and play. So, but anyway, I've referenced this before. I've actually talked to doctors and had some positive feedback when they went through their own experiences with this. Ended up and discussed this with a patient, brought it up myself to see just what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the patient was now their third visit with me, 3 years, had told me, she says, if you had told me that the first visit, said, I would have walked out the door. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I know you and understand what you're trying to say, but I give this illustration as an example that almost anything is at play here. If you want it to be, you can do almost anything you want. I mean, I would go through ortho K-fits and saying, what happens if can I do that -8 with this style lens? Can I do that with this? And I would try it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's one of the things that makes this so amazing, because you can just you are the architect of your dreams or your practice or whatever. You're the person who makes that happen. And so I would be at play all the time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
try things. Let's see if this would work. Like you said, let's polish this thing up, you know.
Right.
So it's interesting because you deal with this stuff. You have a point where you've got to let go and just start living, and enjoying enjoying this
Right.
patient experience that you're having, and this young human being that you're working with, and the parents that are involved in that
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I just wanted to focus a lot of time on if you are not willing to show up and do this like full all in with conviction and passion and represent what you're saying, then the next part is not going to be useful to you. So that like the next part is going to be like, what are the pillars of visual hygiene,
mhm.
right? And then we'll have Carrie give us an example of how he would have presented these to a parent. But the first part is super important. I cannot stress that enough. We can tell you that you should talk about diet and exercise with your parents and your patients, but if you can't show up and do it and go all in on it, then it's really not going to matter, because then you're just asking them a useless question. Like, you have to have follow through. You have to transmit that genuine authenticity. You're trying to build trust. This is important to you. Health and wellness is important, and you have to transmit that, okay? So that's why we spend as much time as we did on that first part, because if you cannot get that first part down, the next part is not going to be
It's
of
going to
any
be much
use
more
to you.
difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to
Okay.
be walking that talk, as we talked about, the
Exactly.
commitment to the and
So,
the most amazing thing about that too is, with your own personal experiences, is that it's a mind body thing, because once the mind and the body get tracked on the same path, it's an amazing experience. It's so good for you to
right.
get those two in the same plane, and it
Mhm.
knows. They know, your mind and your body know when it's not going right. I
Right.
mean, and you maybe aren't listening properly, but they know. And as
Yeah.
soon as you reconnect that, it's magic. It's like, oh my God, it's so good for you. The endorphins, everything else that comes flowing through your system to reinforce that, you know. So yeah, so doing that for your patients is like, you got to go there. It's part of myopia control, myopia management.
Right. Okay, so let's go into the pillars of what visual hygiene is, because this is a visual hygiene 101 episode. So what we're going to be talking about is uh time outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
exercise, time outdoors, getting proper amount, like how much time should my kid be outside, right? What kind of activities should my child be doing? When should those activities be happening throughout the day, right? The second thing that we're going to talk about is screen time. How much time? Like, all parents know screen time is not great for everybody. We're all spending too much time in front of our devices. If COVID gave us, if there was a silver lining to any of that, like, there's no mystery to it now. Like, we've
Yeah.
all been experienced trapped indoors, putting children in front of the screens even more than they were before. All parents understand this, right? So we're going to talk about that. The third is about nutrition, right? And how you would communicate, how that affects the messaging, the
Mm-hmm.
visual hygiene aspect of it. And then what would be the next one? What am I leaving out after that? What do you think?
Well, I always talked about posture,
Okay.
but that's also,
Ergonomics.
yeah, ergonomics. It's really falling down into ergonomics again. It's the whole, they're all related.
Right.
When you start talking about one thing, you inevitably you lead to another thing. But I think the thing is, in my mind, was to reinforce the 3D world again for the
Mm-hmm.
patients. There's nothing wrong with the child. Instead of, don't put them on screens, have them work with blocks, Legos,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that when they're growing up. I thought it was always important for the patient, if they could, to have an athletic back, to be doing some kind of athletics, whatever it was. They didn't have to be on a team, swimming,
Yeah.
gymnastics, whatever it was that they needed to do, they needed to be active. I would stress that they do that part of it. That was a natural flow, and the word flow is interesting because, this concept of being, not getting out of your own way so that
Right.
you can actually do a task. So, those kinds of things are all related, to the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. And around our first pillar of like outside time and exercise, right? It reminds me of like older generations. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But it always seemed to me that like older generations were more into focused on the idea of creating a well-rounded individual,
Hmm.
right?
Oh yeah.
Social skills, athleticism,
Go
a
back to the
musical
Greeks.
instrument, right? Or some sort
Yeah.
of artistic outlet. Like, and I'm not saying that this was every person and this was across the board, but that's definitely an impression I got from society and culture of the previous generations when I read about it, you know?
Well, you can definitely see the lack of, even in the education system with the lack of humanities courses and things like that. Now,
Right. Yeah.
that's taken a toll. The physicians are not well-rounded, and the patients can tell they haven't had that, that the other generations did have, and that made all the difference.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's
yes.
talk about it
Yeah.
then. Outside time, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when I was a kid, I was your kid. I mean, I technically still am, right? Because you're my father and you'll
Yeah.
always be older than me. So, uh, you know, when I was a kid coming up, the message was go outside, come back at lunch, you eat, go back outside, come home when the street lights come on, right? And like that is an oversimplification
Mm-hmm.
of your the parenting style from you and mom, but the idea was go outside, go
Mm-hmm.
play with the other kids outside, go have fun,
Right.
play sports and whatever. Don't get into trouble, obviously. But that just doesn't happen anymore, right?
And it's true. And that conversation doesn't just begin with the newborn. It begins before the newborn. So
How so?
I would have that conversation with the mothers,
Right.
before, or even if before they had even pregnant, if they were thinking that they're going to have kids and they were nearsighted or there's these tendencies, I'd have that conversation. If you have a child, this is what you need to do. So
Right.
I would cover that ground long
Okay, so let's go
before,
through that then. Yeah, so
yeah, long
let's
before
say
the,
patient in your chair and
right.
it's a mom and she says, I'm
She's nearsighted.
I'm expecting, so like
Even before they would even, but yes.
okay,
Yeah.
but let's say that's the scenario, right? Like
Okay.
you
Yeah.
have a mom in the chair and she says, you're going through the health
Mhm.
history, anything changes.
Right.
Well, I'm pregnant, and you're like, oh, congratulations, or whatever you
Right.
want to say. So, what is your messaging then to before that baby is even born? What are you trying to say?
We're reminding them of where they were at, with their eyes, and when they're talking, a nearsighted patient, and we're talking to the fact that they would need to then fight these things that they're facing now, the issues that they're facing in society. That's going to put all that pressure. I mean, we had moms who were with the 6-month-old was putting them on computers. They're on their lap,
Mm-hmm.
because they
Mm-hmm.
thought that was going to help them be smarter, and it didn't have anything to do with that.
Totally.
So we can encourage them that they have to think. They have to be a little different than this. They're not going to push, these kind of. In fact, they should be later in life. We talk about the American Pediatric Association's guidelines, everything else. Instead of getting a smartphone, a flip phone, when they
Mm-hmm.
eventually have to have a phone, this is when they're a lot older. But in the beginning, with the kids, yes, get them outside, however it takes to do that, and then don't be using. Have we seen these computers used as babysitters? The
Right.
kids are playing little games on them. Don't be doing that to a
Yeah.
young mind like that. There's evidence now that this delays brain activity,
Yeah.
and growth, and it overwhelms the system. I mean, I can tell you stories. We're on a cruise, or what the kid that's being pushed around a stroller, about a year and a half old, had the iPad in front of him, was plugged in. So you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine what happens.
Yeah.
The things that you see today from those habits, the lack of the fact the patient doesn't observe.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask my patients when the parents brought them in, well, what did you see on your drive in here? What did you
Right.
notice?
Yeah. All right, that's it for this regular version of the episode about visual hygiene. That was part 1 about the presentation. Part 2 is in the extended version of this episode where we go more into all of those things that we touched upon in the presentation part. That's waiting for you if you decide to become a paid supporter. And I think you should consider becoming one because you made it this far, so I know you're interested. And if you love nerding out about myopia, if you're here to learn, if you enjoy these episodes, if you are all about the passion, the inspiration, the education that comes with the myopia mindset, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the podcast. It's $12 a month, which is basically the price of a cup of coffee each and every week. And in return, you will get the extended version of this episode, the extended version of every episode we do, which has oftentimes just been an additional 30 to 40 minutes, which is basically a whole other podcast each and every week. But you also get an exclusive supporter only monthly bonus episode. And you've heard all about Carrie Herzberg's passionate approach to presenting visual hygiene in his practice. This month's episode is an interview about his specific myopia mindset. And this is a guy who is an all-time guru, absolute legend of our industry, who has inspired so many successful myopia management specialists in our industry. And these are great insights. And I hope it's a source of motivation, inspiration, and education. Myopiamindset.substack.com is how you become a paid supporter of the podcast. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next one.